It's my pleasure to introduce Sue Thomas today. Sue is a true public intellectual. She has been thinking about and researching computers and the internet since the 80s, when in many ways what we know to be digital culture today was a speculative dream. It was where the code was something about a world that we were about to produce. And in that period and in that time span, her non-fiction books have not only considered, but they've added to the grammar of how we understand digital culture, digital life, and our relationship to this thing called the digital. The work Technobiophilia, hope I said that right, thinks about the recursive relations of the digital, both practically and conceptually, to nature itself. She's looked into the deep power of metaphors in cyberculture. She's asked us to think about our life online as a kind of travel log. And not only has she written about digital life, but she has also produced online communities and helped people to engage in online spaces in really deep and substantive ways. In her own words, and we're going to ask this at the end or during, because I did I don't know the date of these words, but Sue says, today, and that's the temporal barrier, I'm still in love with being wired, but I have questions. Where are we headed? What should we be doing to ensure that our digital lives are healthy, mindful, and productive? So at that point, I hand over to you to tell us whether you're still in love and what these questions may mean for us all. So, Sue, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I would say, first of all, yes, I am still in love with it. Should I start the screen share? Oh, I'll start it in a sec. I'll just say thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And it's great to be in Illinois. So let me just put my bit of the screen on, because I'm not sure. Ah, yes, there we are. I wasn't quite sure if that was going to come up. Right, so thanks very much. It's really exciting to talk about this to you. And I've prepared a talk that I think should go up till half the hour. So it should be about 30 minutes, but I've told Tamsin to jump on me if I seem to be droning on and on. So what I'd like to start with is, hopefully you'll see the, hang on, there we go, is talk about how Technobiophilia came to be written and the research that I did for it, and then kind of take you through my thinking on this. I realized just at the last minute that what I've not done here is cover virtual reality and augmented reality, because that's a huge extra area, which I did have quite a lot of material about, but I decided actually it would take up so much space that I would just leave that aside and kind of talk about that another time if you'd like me to. So I wanted to start off by talking about these three books, because I've been writing about this topic for a long time. So the first book, Hello World, Travels in Virtuality, the first book shown here, not my first book, was published in 2004, and that is a very personal travel memoir of my life in cyberspace. So I'd been online since about 94, so 10 years when this book came out, and was obsessed then, and I still am obsessed even after everything that's happened in cyberspace. I was just fascinated by this sense of being in one or being in two places at a time, living an analog life and a digital life, really parallel and intersecting a lot of the time. And in fact, part of this book was actually written in Australia. My Australian colleagues might be interested to know. It was written in California. It was written in the UK and various physical places around the world. So it's very much a kind of travel book in that respect, but it's also a travel book of cyberspace. And after I'd finished that in 2004, I thought, well, okay, am I the only person in the world who feels like this, who thinks about myself in cyberspace as being in a real place? So I started some research to find out about that. And that was the research that ended up 8 years later in Technobiophilia, Nature and Cyberspace. And I'll be talking mostly about that particular research in this talk. So that came out in 2013. And then in 2017, I decided that Technobiophilia is quite a big book. It's very detailed. And I thought, really, we need a kind of simplified version of this with a kind of summary of the research behind it, but also some practical tips as to what you can actually do to live a more integrated life. So that's the third book, Nature and Wellbeing in the Digital Age. And that came out, I self-published that in 2017. But of course, now it's taken on a different kind of meaning, as we'll see as we go along. So these were my research questions in 2005 when I started writing Technobiophilia. The map was drawn by Tim Berners-Lee, one of the founder of the World Wide Web. In 2007, he tried to draw a map of the web. Lots of people were trying to draw maps of cyberspace at that time. There's an excellent book by Martin Dodge about this, with lots and lots of pictures of different interpretations of what was cyberspace kind of physically like to move around in. And my research questions were kind of related to that. So I just had two for this book. So the first one was about metaphors. Metaphors are about understanding and experiencing one kind of thing in terms of another. Is there any evidence of the widespread use of nature metaphors in the language of cyberspace? So that was the first question. The second question was then, if so, why are they there? And why did they bring nature in with us into the online world? So what is cyberspace like? I spent a lot of that time asking people that question. But one thing we can be pretty sure of is that it's nothing like the Matrix. I can't imagine anybody here who experiences cyberspace or the internet as something as kind of bleak as this. So, but then what is real anyway? This is one of my favorite cartoons. It's actually a Buddhist monk. It's a Buddhist cartoon. He's on his mobile and he says, "Can I call you back? I'm watching a live stream." And of course, we all know that watching a live stream means something quite different in terms of Netflix, etc. But he is actually watching a live stream. So what's real and what isn't? And I thought it was interesting to show you John Perry Barlow's words from 1996, which, as I said before, is roughly about the time I started going on the internet. It was about 94, I think. And I was fascinated by these discussions that people were having about, well, what is this place? And at the time, John Perry Barlow actually produced a manifesto of cyberspace. Problematic in lots of ways because it was very much an agenda of freedom to do anything you like. So there are pros and cons to that. We won't go into it. A very libertarian view. But basically, his point was cyberspace is not real. It's a world that is both everywhere and nowhere, but it's not where bodies live. And that was very much sent then, that because there was nothing physical in the internet or cyberspace, then the laws, natural laws of society, if you like, did not apply. There were lots of arguments about that in those days. More recently, Nathan Jurgensen has spoken a lot on behalf of the idea of digital dualism. So 2011, he was saying digital dualists believe that the digital world is virtual and the physical world is real. Then he says this is a fallacy. Instead, I want to argue that the digital and the physical are increasingly meshed. And mesh was a very popular term at the time. So people had moved in that time from thinking about the world, the cyberspace, as completely kind of abstract, as John Perry Barlow experienced it. And people like Jurgensen, who start to say, Barlow is a digital dualist. Actually, it's not that simple. We are enmeshed. That was 2011. Now, a lot of people would just are saying really that we're working more towards almost complete integration. So what is real when we think about these things? So going back to the metaphors, my question one, is there evidence of the widespread use of nature metaphors in the language of cyberspace? Well, yes, is the answer to that. You can see part of the cover of a book that I found, The Computer Insectary, where Roger Ebert and John Kratz had already in 1994 cracked this one by providing an entire guide, a field guide to viruses, bugs, Trojan horses, and other stuff that are in the programs that we were using. And even in those early days, there were lots and lots of metaphors, so they were easy to find. I went off to California for a while I was based at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I was really asking everybody I could find who was connected with the computer world, with technology, about their metaphors and the way that they understood the internet and cyberspace in a physical sense. And so very quickly, it was clear that my answer is the reference. The answer was yes. So that was kind of easily done, if you like, not much research because it was just everywhere. But then that led me to question two, which was why? And the fact is, I had no idea why we took all these nature metaphors into cyberspace. So I turned to environmental psychology, which was a completely new area for me. My original degree was in English and history with a little bit of computing. And environmental psychology was kind of way off my beat, if you like. So I had to learn a lot. And I came across the term biophilia. Now, just to give you a quick history of it, the actual term itself was coined by Erich Fromm in 1973, where he was talking about the passionate love of life and everything that is alive. But it really came into prominence when the biologist E.O. Wilson used the term biophilia to describe the innate attraction to life and lifelike processes. And he tells a very interesting story about how he was working in the jungle in Suriname. He was actually working with ants. And he had a kind of moment, an aha moment deep in the jungle, when he suddenly realized how completely small and unimportant he was at that moment in the scheme of things, the life of the jungle as it goes on, and how humans are just so very insignificant in that kind of environment. And it was that led him to think very deeply about what is this connection that we all feel to the planet, whereas actually most of us, particularly humans, you might say, are actually very insignificant and life just goes on without us. And he decided that what he called the tendency of humans to focus on and to affiliate with nature and other life forms is partly genetic. And I think that's very interesting because we all know what if somebody says to you, oh, I've been a bit stressed, I need to get back to nature for a while. We all understand what that means. It's a kind of deep-seated need to get to somewhere that's wild, but it might not be very wild, but just a sense of wishing to reconnect, if you like, with the planet. We all understand what that is, but we find it hard to actually put it into words. So the word he gave to it was biophilia. And interestingly, he suggested that biophilia could also lie dormant for periods of time until something triggers it into action again. And I have a kind of vague theory that maybe what's going on here is that, if you like, in the early part of the 20th century, when we were humans were kind of obsessed with cities and concrete and so on, maybe biophilia was more dormant then, and maybe technology, including virtual reality and so on, has actually triggered it back into action again. And maybe that's why we're feeling so intensely about it now. So I'll show you some of the research projects that were done to explore this sense of connectedness to nature and to find out whether it had any real benefits or whether it was just sentimental. So this is a very famous one. So the R.S. Ulrich, who is a psychologist, did this experiment with 46 patients recovering from gallbladder removal surgery in a hospital. So half were put into a room where there was a window, but it just faced a brick wall. And the other half were put into a room with a window overlooking a natural scene, which I understand was just a kind of fairly boring tree, nothing special. But the figures were amazing, the results. They found that the people who could see this rather sad-looking tree had shorter post-operative stays, fewer negative evaluations in the nurse's notes, and they took fewer painkillers than the other patients in the rooms where the view was confined to a brick wall. Now, this experiment was repeated time and time again in prisons, in schools, in offices, and the results are always consistent, that a view of nature can have actual physical benefits. For example, by testing heart rate, by testing blood pressure and other stress levels, it's quite easy to get some numbers out of this and to see how directly they're having an effect. And connected with this is a couple called R&S Kaplan, who were also psychologists, who looked into this more deeply, into what was going on, and they came up with the notion of nearby nature. And what's interesting about this is that it's small suggestions of the natural world, which they say, although they're seemingly insignificant and often you can't touch them, you can only look at them like out of a window, they can have a real benefit to human well-being. And so they called this nearby nature. And I thought, well, if nearby nature works with windows, why can't it work with screens? And I started thinking about Facebook. And the reason I'm using this particular image here, it's a friend of mine, Thilo Burke, who at the time was in Santiago. I was in England, and he was very fond of posting photos on Facebook. So here's one where he just posted this photo saying, "Good morning, this is just what I just woke up to." Now, you probably know yourselves that pictures of sunrises and sunsets and beach scenes, water, all kinds of water pictures are incredibly important on Facebook. They get loads and loads of likes, for Instagram as well. And they really speak to people. And it kind of rather amuses me because we see similar things like this all over the world, but they really connect with us. This picture of a place far away, just on Facebook or on Instagram, can make real emotional connection. And so I've made a note here asking you whether you have images of nature like this on your screen wallpaper or screensaver. If I was in a hall with you in a classroom, I'd ask you to put up your hand and tell me whether or not you have something like that. So I know from experience that it's usually about 70 or 80% of people, oh, you're raising your hands, who, you know, of any audience that I have for this, always say, yes, I do. So my answer to that is, well, now you know why. So I'm conscious of the time. It's already 20 past. Some more examples. This is called A Room with a View. And this is a project that I've heard about when I first moved to this area. It's a hospital close to me. And it was actually an artist project, not a technology or a health project. And the idea was that they had a ward with leukemia patients who basically were kept in isolation because it was so vulnerable. So they certainly couldn't go out and they couldn't have visitors. So what was arranged was that they would have these TV screens in their rooms, and the screens were connected to a live feed from a naturally beautiful place, not very far away. They actually had two. One was overlooking greenery and fields, and the other one was overlooking the harbour. And they provided this for people so that they could feel connected to the world. And it was very common, for example, for people to find again that they needed less pain relief, and that because they could put this on and off any time, quite a lot of people chose to watch the sunrise in the mornings if they had a bad night and perhaps had trouble with pain. They could watch the sunrise. Unfortunately, because it was an artistic project, they didn't collect any data, which is a bit frustrating because obviously these people would have been measured all the time, and it would have been handy to actually have some data correlating what they said happened. But so that's Room with a View. Then the Kaplans at the same time, we're talking about the late 80s, were developing a theory of attention restoration. And this is quite detailed. I'm just going to whiz through a few examples. But the way they saw the way that we connect with nature, and this is not about the digital, this is just about nature. They talked about different kinds of settings. So being away, extent, fascination, soft and hard, which I'll explain, and compatibility are the four qualities of attention restoration theory. So I'll show you some examples. So being away. This is where the setting is physically or conceptually different from your usual environment. And a good example of this is that they suggest that you can be away if you just walk out into your garden when you need a break, walk around the garden, looking for new buds on the plants and making sure everything's okay in the garden, takes your head a long way away from problems that you might be dealing with inside at your desk, for example. And so they're saying that mental distance is as important as literal distance, is just to be in a different place. Examples of being away include Farmville, if we're looking at the digital realm. I wrote an article about technobiophilia in 2013 that was published in Slate, and Zynga, who make the game Farmville, contacted me because they do a lot of user testing, and they'd found that a lot of their players they played Farmville because it made them feel strongly connected to nature, because it helped them to relax and de-stress. If they didn't have their own garden, it felt like a real garden. And they'd been getting these results and could never understand why. You know, they thought it was just a game. And so when they read my article, they contacted me and said, now we know what's going on. It's some kind of technobiophilia effect. You know, they're experiencing nature through technology, and they're feeling like they're being away. And one of my favorites is the story of Grand Theft Auto, which is another way of being away. On Flickr, there is a group of landscape photographers who operate completely in Grand Theft Auto. They log on there, they take landscape photographs like this one, and they share them with each other on Flickr. And there you can see from the quote from Adam Thwaites, who produced this photo, you know, he says that GTA 5 is a truly living, breathing world with so much depth and attention to detail that he feels that he can use it as a subject for photography. You probably know that the whole landscape is simulations of Californian landscapes. And people, of course, know that. They know they're not real, but they consider them to have similar qualities as real landscapes. Extent is something to do with the way that an image of nature or a piece of nature can be very kind of intense and imagined, so that a miniature tree like this bonsai tree can also be imagined as being a very large tree. It's a suggestion of, as it says here, a whole little world or a microcosm that can be captured in a small space. And an example of that in internet, if you like, is net surfing. This is a great book by J.C. Hertz, published in 1995, when she wrote, "One morning, I logged off at dawn, walked the 4 blocks from my apartment to the blue Atlantic and jumped in." And she thought, wow, now this is bandwidth. And she saw the ocean as being, excuse me, just the same as being in the vast internet. And in fact, when I interviewed Tim O'Reilly in 2009, and I asked him what his metaphor for cyberspace would be, he said, the internet is a lot like the ocean. We see very little of it at any one time. And lastly, fascination, content or mental processes that engage attention effortlessly and allow you to rest your mind. And there's a nice story with this about a dentist. The psychiatrist Aaron Katcher, excuse me, in 1984, tried an experiment in a dentist's office. They would bring in an aquarium full of live fish and basically measure the vital signs and so on, and the behaviors of the patients in the waiting room as they watched the fish. And then other days they would take the fish tank away. And they found that when the fish were around on aquarium days, the patients were much less anxious, the fish had a calming influence on people. And many of the patients were said to be, which I think is a bit chilling, said to be more compliant during treatment if they had been watching fish just swimming around their aquarium. And there's an interesting digital equivalent to this, which is watching streaming video of nature. Fascination, soft fascination, invites the mind to wander. So it's a bit like you just sitting staring at the sky. And this video, I can't show you the video, but it was a waterfall that an artist filmed for 8 hours. He just ran the film for 8 hours and then put it on YouTube. And it was just a static camera. And people became obsessed with it. As it says here, it's been viewed over 6 million times. And hospitals use it in their medical research. Just the fact of just sitting and watching the water running, the wind rustling in the leaves, has amazing impacts on your heart rate, your pulse, and your general sense of relaxation. So all of this and lots more other research as well brought me to a definition of technobiophilia. I know it's a clunky word. I can't think of a better one. Some people talk about digital nature, but that doesn't quite do it for me. So I used E.O. Wilson's original definition, the innate attraction to life and lifelike processes, but then I added on as they appear in technology. And then I worked out that technobiophilic practices, objects and devices have one or more of these features. They connect our lives in nature with our lives in the digital. They contribute to well-being via helping us develop a tech-nature balance. And they support future kinds of biodiversity as technology and nature move closer together. But there are questions about this. Do we really understand what we want and how it could be used? Another quote, this time from Nicholas Negroponte, who founded Wired magazine. He said this in 1995, so if you like, of the John Perry Barlow era. And this was what he really wanted. He said digital living will include less and less dependence upon being in a specific place at a specific time, and the transmission of place itself will start to become possible. Then he talks about, if I could really look out the electronic window of my living room in Boston and see the Alps, hear the cowbells, and smell the digital manure in summer, in a way, I'm very much in Switzerland. That was very much part of, the kind of cyber dream, was that you could do that. But now in some ways we still haven't got the smell, but we've got the cowbells and so on. But is it going to work out the way we want? The picture here was taken by a friend of mine who went on a cruise ship which had virtual reality balconies. And this apparently is quite common now. If you book a cheaper cabin in a cruise ship, you don't have a sea view. So this is one of those interior cabins where to replace the sea view, they're provided with a virtual reality balcony, which has its own curtain, as you can see, and it looks like the sea is moving. And I believe in some of them you can hear as well, you can hear the sea. So it's not real at all, but it's very enjoyable and it's very calming. And I start to think, well, what would happen if people who are forced to live in poor housing were all given one of these calming, soothing virtual reality images? Or in prisons, they might calm people down a lot. They might have positive benefits, but it's a bit creepy to think about the ways in which this kind of powerful biophilic device could be used. Another issue, excuse me, is about the way we view nature with our digital equipment. And this is something I'm writing about at the moment. I'm really interested in how this works. In this age of David Attenborough and everybody loving TV nature documentaries, it's interesting to see what happens with live webcams, because I don't know if you've ever watched one of these, but there are lots and lots of webcams set up, often by rangers in forests and particular areas where different animals breed. But probably the most famous are these eagle webcams. They seem to attract the most attention, but you have them at watering holes in Africa. All over the world, there are these live webcams where you can watch nature, which is red in tooth and claw. And this particular nest was set up with bald eagles. It's set up deliberately. It's watched over by rangers. The live webcam streams all the time, and there's a chat room next to it where people talk about the birds, and they get very attached to the birds. But unfortunately, there are sometimes incidents, and this is a particular incident where one of the bald eagle chicks, who the viewers had already given a name and called Snap, was very injured. Probably one of the parents stood on it, and it was obviously very ill. And in the end, it had to be euthanized. But before that point, there was an outcry of people worrying about how this chick could be helped. They wanted the rangers to go up and take it to get it and take it to the vets and so on. But the rangers were saying, we cannot do that. Life and death happen all the time in the natural world. And there have been other issues. I read about one where the eagle parents brought back a live white cat and dropped it in the nest. And the viewers got very, very upset. And as one webcam viewer says here, I wasn't up for that learning experience. But this is real life being shown to you by technology. And it's not David Attenborough narrating and making a story out of it and cutting and editing. This is actual real life. So there's another side to digital technology. It can soothe us, or it can show us things that we maybe don't really want to see. How am I doing? Just a few left. Another thing I wanted to mention was the idea of the biophilic city. This is the Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. These amazing towers that are actually built with they have plants growing up the side of them and sometimes inside them. Some of them you can actually go inside and some of them you can't, but they're very much a kind of combination of technology and plant life merging together to make this amazing new thing. Singapore is a very biophilic city. The idea is that you apply biophilic design principles to it. There's a great deal of greenery. One interesting thing, though, is that when I was visiting there, somebody told me that because there's so much greenery, they have to use a lot of insecticide to protect it. And because the insects are dead, many of the insects die, the birds die because there are no insects for them to eat. So getting the balance right can be extremely difficult, no matter how hard you try. And here's another idea, the Technobiophilic City, my thought, which uses the kind of aspects of biophilia and technology to produce some amazing things. This is a bicycle path in Holland, which is embedded with a special kind of stone that absorbs, I think it's stone or glass, absorbs light during the day and emits it at night, lighting up the cycle path in a pattern that's meant to simulate a Van Gogh painting. Nearly at the end now. So I have some technobiophilic design challenges for developers, because there are all kinds of things that we could use and we could make if we had the whereabouts to try. And I set a technobiophilic challenge to a hacker conference in Rio de Janeiro a few years ago. And this pot that you see here is a prototype for what they developed. And the idea was that this plant inside this glass dome is connected to its owner. And if the owner looks after themselves and eats the right food and gets the right amount of exercise, then the plant will flourish, it will be watered and fed and looked after automatically. But because it's linked into its human owner, if the human owner neglects themselves, the plant is neglected, so they could be responsible for the death of the plant. A bit gruesome, but interesting idea. And I have actually put together a whole page of design challenges if anybody's interested in that. So nearly at the end now, Technobiophilia and Lockdown. There's been a lot of research in the last year into how digital nature is affecting people. And this is one study that I found recently, where they found that there is a significant increase of feelings of connectedness to the community after watching digital nature. And interestingly, tended nature scenes elicited more social aspirations than wild nature scenes. So maybe that takes us back to the webcam problem. I don't know. Also, the BBC is doing a project at the moment for Soundscapes for Wellbeing that you can explore. And they're working with the University of Exeter, who have a virtual nature experiment that you can take part in. I can send you this info later on if you want to try it. So finally, a practical tip. If Zoom is wearing you out, and I've been trying this a lot lately, put lots of plants behind your screen so your colleagues don't see them, but you do, and they can make you feel a lot better, and you can reach out and touch them and nip off anything that might not be looking healthy. It's your secret garden in your Zoom room, if you like. So that's the end of the talk. Sorry to rush through it. But I suppose the summary of what I'm saying is that we need more nature, not less technology. We don't want digital detoxes. We want to integrate and balance our lives in nature with our lives in technology. And I will stop there. I know I've gone way over time. Sorry.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm going to ask the first question, and then we're going to roll out to Joe and then Mary. And my question is a kind of big picture question. It seems like that throughout your work, there's this kind of tension, this dialectic at play, where nature as a grammar is being transposed onto a digital space. And I assume that's, to give you that kind of sense of tranquility in a technical environment that isn't naturally tranquil. But there's this kind of undercurrent that keeps appearing, is that we are both getting drawn towards nature as a real thing, if we can talk about this, and away from it. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that there is an ecological reality to information systems, which is, I just read this piece that Bitcoin right now uses as much energy as Argentina, as the country of Argentina. And these infrastructures that we may be moving into for a sense of tranquility from the world that is untranquil, are we inadvertently creating some kind of digital Anthropocene of an infrastructure that is ecologically unsustainable? And so then again, this ideological function of nature, which seems central to your work, is it the agent of our destruction again in a new digital form, or how can we use some of these skills as a plan for action?
Yeah, lots of questions. I think I may have read the same or a similar article to you, because I was reading somewhere this week that apparently these streaming Zoom meetings are using up huge amounts of energy and so on, and we really shouldn't be doing them. And yes, I mean, obviously, I don't know, because we're at such a critical point at the moment. I think it's not sidestepping it, but I think what underlies a lot of the issues that you're mentioning is the human relationship with nature, because we have a very idealistic, sentimental notion of nature, and a similarly antagonistic notion towards technology. So there are often opportunities for us actually to use technology for the good, but we resist them, because it's very much the two worlds. An example here where I live is, I live by the sea, and there was a big move to put a wind farm out in the bay, and nobody wanted it. Even though, of course, it would be more ecological. And a lot of it's driven by that sentimentality. So I think really the answer to all of the questions that you're raising are really about, can we get to grips with what nature really is, which is red and tooth and claw and can be dangerous for us, and what technology really is, which is that it can be very beneficial or not, and it's up to us to be responsible to balance those things out. I think it might be too big a jump for a lot of people.
Right. Thank you. Joe, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I had multiple kinds of thoughts on it. It was very interesting in terms of organizing this framework. Two responses: one as a digital artist and teaching a class on photography. I'd ask people to bring pictures of a spiritual picture and a mystical picture, and without explaining to them what that meant. There was basically a sensibility of the sunset being spiritual, but something mystical generally tended to be fog or a foggy picture. So I'm wondering if you had these pictures of fog or foggy people up on a wall rather than a sunset, whether that would provoke different responses about both our nature. The other response that I have is, I'm teaching a class in cultural anthropology. I normally have my students go out into the real world, being a digital dualist at this point, to observe people and then interview them. So I was, since most of all classes now are Zoom, how do you do that kind of research using the digital cyberspace, Twitter, social media, some other kinds of aspects? And I think you've given me some ideas on looking at how we construct that cyberspace world, and perhaps the students can poke around in that in creating a new kind of research project. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I mean, one thing I might say to that is that if the students and their interviewees are into gaming, they could interview them in a game world. I mentioned Farmville and GTA, but obviously there are lots and lots of game worlds with very different landscapes. And so the landscape that they choose to meet in, you know, could be a very interesting area of study in itself.
Yeah, one of my students observed people who, when they got frustrated at games, they would start cursing. So he would kind of measure the degree of frustration against cursing behavior and then interview them. But that was only one example, but you've given me other examples on what to pursue.
Good. Thanks.
So, Mary, you're next.
Hello, Sue.
Hi.
Your talk really resonated with me because I love your love of nature, and I love that you're finding the technology that we're able to integrate it. Like, I can't go into a doctor or a dentist or anywhere if they don't have something peaceful and lovely in nature. You know, you feel anxious, and it does kind of make you feel better. So I think it's great that you point out the kind of positive ways in which these can be merged, you know, as well as pointing to some of the dangers to the subjects. But my point, having just listened to a podcast about a new book by Nicole, I think it's Perlroth, who talks about, and I'm coming off your comment about complete integration. You said the internet is now global integration. And what that has afforded now that is becoming revealed is the way we're being attacked, you know, cyber criminals getting into our, you know, the water being poisoned, the capacity to do such extraordinary damage that we had no idea about before. And it's as extraordinary as the positive thing that you're sharing with us about nature. And we don't know about it. And we don't even know that, you know, we are connected and that it's going to rebound on us. So I was wondering if, one, you'd read what she's been saying. I mean, I was kind of awed and scared and shocked by what she revealed. But how you think about that aspect of the global integration of the cyber world?
I haven't read her, but I recognize the conversation. And yes, I mean, Philip asked at the beginning if I still loved cyberspace or some such, and I do, but you know, I'm really an aging hippie. And, you know, in the 90s, we really thought that the internet and, you know, worldwide wired community was the answer to everything. Well, we found out that it's not quite like that, certainly in the last presidency, and lots of other ways as well. And I'm struggling with it. You know, there was a time at one point in the early 90s where I thought, actually, I think I've got to turn my back on this because it's getting unpleasant. But then I didn't want to. So I kind of stayed with it, as you stay with family members or homes that you know, you don't really like. But it feels like a kind of lifelong commitment. So I'm still with it, but I'm much more cautious, and I have far fewer expectations than I did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, unfortunately. I don't, God.
I was going to say, so do we have a responsibility as scholars and citizens to demand some things? I mean, partly what she said is that governments, including the American government, allow hacks and allow these back doors to exist because they can go towards espionage or use them for espionage. But of course, then cyber criminals pick all this up and then come back and harm us. So what's our role in understanding this space and, you know, the kinds of demands that we should have? Because this space is sort of unregulated in some significant ways.
I think our role, interestingly, as academics, as you say, particularly, is what I was saying earlier about the negativity about technology in some, unfortunately, often applies to academia as well. And I had lots of difficulties. I worked at a transdisciplinary institute where I was a professor of new media. So I was kind of working with lots of different kinds of people. But even there, many people, they didn't want to learn about technology. They were automatically against it. And so because of that, they didn't understand it. So they were frightened of the wrong things and totally unaware of understanding what they should have been concerned about.
Good point. Thank you, Sue, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Sue. Carlos. Carlos, are you? Yep, there we go. Great. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Wonderful talk. I really like to discuss this in particular, the idea of biophilia, and I really appreciate your talk too. And my question is, actually, it's not a question. I would like to hear some thoughts about what you think designers can do, design disciplines. How can they contribute to create these biophilic opportunities, to bring the biophilic experience to customers, users? And in particular, I thought about emerging disciplines like biomimicry, how they can contribute.
Yes, there's a lot of work being done in that area, isn't there? Biophilic design, and it ranges far and wide. Are you involved in any particular area? Because I'm thinking about city design, building design, interior design. Is any one of those relevant?
Well, in all of that, because I teach design, so it involves students from different design disciplines, but I'm a visual communication designer in particular, so I might be interested in that aspect.
Well, I would point you, if you haven't already come across him, to Professor Tim Beatley, who's at, I think, University of Virginia. And he runs a Biophilic Cities network, and he's written extensively on biophilic design. And then there's another man whose name has completely gone out of my head, but I can't think of his name, who's almost like the father of biophilic design.
It might be Keller, maybe?
Yes, Kellett, Stephen Kellett, that's it. Yes, thanks. Yeah. People like that have got really connected with all kinds of projects across the world. And what I've tried to do is push technobiophilic design on top of that. And Tim Beatley's recognized that and written about it, I'm really pleased to say. And to me, that's just another angle that you add on, that you're not just thinking about nature in your design, but you're also thinking about how nature works with technology. I mean, this here, I've got a, don't know if you can see, it's a wooden mouse. It's made of bamboo. You can get them on Amazon. But when I'm using this, I've got my hand on a nicely shaped piece of wood. You know, and those body connections with natural materials are really important in terms of keeping us connected with the real world. So that kind of conscious changing of your even work environment around your desk, putting plants on your desk and so on. Like my idea of the Zoom screen where I could be talking to you. At the moment, I don't, but I could have lots of plants just behind your head, you know, which kind of make me feel a bit more connected. So it's about consciousness and awareness, I think, is the road into that.
Do you think a particular product, the design or you know, artifacts and material products are potentially the biggest opportunity for biophilic design, or maybe architecture?
Yeah, I think they are, because if you think about, you know, I'm looking at my laptop that I'm talking to you on, I'm looking at my phone. These things are designed as technological artifacts, but they could actually be much better designed if they were informed by biophilic design as well. They don't have to be so dark and hard-edged as they are.
Yes,
you know.
And one of the things that I just want to add to this conversation, which I think was drawn out, is drawn out well in your work, is that there's this distinction between a kind of, are we referring to it symbolically? So is it just on the surface? Are we talking about it to kind of, it's not a real engagement with the technology or the product or its impact within an ecological context. It's just you know, I'm psychologically using the trick of the picture to make you feel. But there's this all the way to the infrastructure kind of proposition that you have in your work is that, you know, we have to get away from the psychological trick and really think about product design in your context,
Yes.
Carlos, is to think about this, you know, product design, but also to get students to think critically. Am I just overlaying a graphic because there is a advertising department that has done psychological research on X, Y, Z. And in fact, that psychological stuff is what's the dark side of the internet right now.
Yes, yeah. And the ecology side that you mentioned that's also relevant with the biophilic design is that's not an area that I personally particularly focus on, but that is crucial. So, you know, my mouse here could make me feel better because I'm connected to a piece of wood, but maybe ecologically it's terrible. I don't know that. You know,
probably is. Most likely.
I have a couple of examples like that, and I wonder how ecological they are. I can show you just. I'm not sure if you can see this. But
I've got one. IKEA,
right?
Yes, I've got one.
And we know that from other products that IKEA still wonderful ideas, great design, but sometimes get edgy, and we know they use resources that they might not be using. They have good practice, consider sustainable design. I don't know, 99% of what they do, but it's not perfect. And if you overuse, or you know, you apply systemically all those design ideas, you might be doing bad things to nature. So it could be, you know. So I think we are surrounded by examples like that.
But if you look on my website, under the Technobiophilia section, I have got a whole section on technobiophilic challenges for developers. And it's a shopping list, really. And it says, please design this for me.
Awesome.
Tamsin, do you want to drop the link into the browser while we take the last question?
Okay.
Okay, so we have one last question. Evelyn, I think I saw you there. Hello, you want to still ask your question? Yes, there we go. I can see you coming alive. No? Okay. Looking at the time as well, Sue, I would like to thank you not only for the time that you have given us today, but the kinds of conceptual nuggets that you have got us to understand. And really what is the most important part, I think, and the most positive aspect that comes out of your work is a direction towards how we act within the world. And when we want to think about the world that we are in, transitioning through or creating, those kinds of real practical challenges that we need to deal with should be front and center. And we think about them through deep understandings of the world. And so your work exemplifies this approach, and we are really thankful that you had the time to talk to us as a group, and we hope to stay connected and be the advocate of what you do as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
See, we can't do rounds of applause. This is one of the things, if someone can do the challenge of the round of applause.
I think some people say you're supposed to do jazz hands or something. But yeah, thank you. It's been a really, really good conversation, and you've given me lots to think about.
Okay, Tamsin.
Thank you, Sue. I just want to also mention that we've got another session in the Imagining Futures speaker series on the 26th of February. What month are we in? And I'll put that in the chat as well.
Great.
And
thank
great
you.
to see. It's also great to see so many familiar faces here. Joe, Wendy, it's always great to see you.
Nice to talk to you all. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.